thank you very much for being here for what we call our couch talks. Or Bill's inquisitive nature comes to the floor. Uh, I wonder if you might be able to talk us through how, when you and I first met, you were another person, right? And then you went through a period of a transition. And the transition ended up with your personality or character, MX Oops. You want to talk about that, like, just briefly, about that change, that journey?
Sure, yeah, thanks for having me. Um, I legally changed my first name to MX, and I'm going by MX Oops. And the name change and the bigger process of transformation, which is never really an arrival, but is a continued journey, is one that was a combination of questions, around how we move through the world, around gender identity, also around practices of naming. And I come from hip hop and club culture, and also am a meditative practitioner, practice and study yoga, and also interested in initiation and what it means when you take on a new name in initiation. So I would say my embodiment as MX and as MX Oops in this moment is the outgrowth of my journey as a person, as an artist. I think my artwork has helped me be more honest about who I am and who I am in the world. Um, and I eventually realized that I wanted to make official how I move through the world. So MX Oops, the name, is a name that I started using maybe 15 years ago in performance or some variations of it. And you know, it is it's connected to clowning, to folly, to kind of mistakes, and something about just being a black, mixed race, queer person with some neuro spiciness in this world, not feeling like I quite fit, right? But we have to find a way forward.
Hmm.
And so some of the clown elements in breaking that I came up through, that was my introduction to dance, has a kind of humorous way to take on what can be very heavy
Mhm.
topics.
Could you,
So
as I remember, there was a time when I first met you. Is it true your mother was a healer?
yeah,
Uh,
she is.
right, she is. So is that what's? And I believe that maybe some years ago that was inspiring some of your own um, practice. Is that still the case?
Yeah, I mean, my mother is amazing and a huge inspiration and has been very supportive of my journey. And my creative work is a combination of media production and a movement toward integrative wellness, because we all know the industry will take and take and take and consume, 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 and then where are we as artists, as humans, left in that process? So I am always looking for both of those spaces to come together. And I think as I think about the impact that I want to have with my work and the
Hmm.
impact I want to have on myself, I want that to be not that I'm doing an art project explicitly to heal people, because I don't know if we can do things that directly. And if I wanted to be that direct, I would probably have an energy bodywork practice instead of doing shows.
Hmm.
But but it is connected to a vision that healing is actually just a movement toward nature, and we are
Hmm.
nature.
Hmm.
So it's not about doing something that's fixed necessarily as becoming more and more whole.
Great, great. Um, well, could you talk about the title "Unfinished Animal." Maybe you touched on it, but what's going on with that title? What would you like me to know about that title?
Well, it's borrowed from a book by Theodore Roszak, written few decades ago, around, and he was also a historian and cultural critic who coined the term counterculture around, the 60s and the summer of love and all this kind of stuff. So he wrote this book that I'm not referencing very much, really just the title I think is really juicy, Unfinished Animal. This idea that there's still something unfinished in human cognition. The direction I'm taking with it and the thing that excites me is this idea that through the process of evolution and evolutionary development, we have inherited all of these ways of perceiving, and that our perception is very much constructed. We're not just passively receiving information from the outside world, but our brains are doing a lot of modeling for us because it's just necessary for us to keep up with what's going on around us. So the question is, if these shortcuts in how we perceive that happen in all the senses, in how we make sense of the world around us having always too much information, for example, if those shortcuts are not a glitch, but a kind of main feature of what it means to be human, that we're always piecing things together in a rather improvised way, I just wonder if we have to have more direct conversations about that, as we're making decisions about how we organize ourselves individually, in relationship, and in society. If we have this kind of built-in um, not knowing what we don't know, how do we talk about that in a way that that encourages the kind of humility we need to move through some of the difficult spaces we need to move through as people?
And we need humility, you say.
Yeah, it's
Humility as
embarrassing.
opposed to fierceness.
Yeah, it's embarrassing to have a body and to have a brain and to always be expected to have things figured out, and we don't because we can't, and it's not
Mm.
possible, and we're not, in this kind of, I don't know how to frame, yeah, Western cultural context where we're
Mhm.
just supposed to know everything all the time, and we don't. And it's really difficult to then have useful conversations um, about difficult topics if we can't have that kind of ability to say, actually, I don't know, and I want to know more.
In reading the this quite impressive press release, it sounds like uh, this piece is not about uh, contemplation. You say it's going to be a party.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do you put those together? When is this contemplating happen when we're like bopping and hitting moves and so on? How does that happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. Guess we'll have to come and find out.
Mhm.
But the design question I'm asking there is, do our meditative and contemplative practices need to happen in always in the quiet, always in meditative retreat? And obviously not. We are using practices of meditation and mindfulness so that we can be more present in the day to day of our lives. And in my experience of studying and practicing yoga and studying and practicing various forms of street styles, breaking house, folk, drum and bass, jungle styles, and being at parties and dancing for hours, and also having the experience of yoga meditation retreat and doing that for hours, the spaces of connection, of feeling connected to other people, connected to myself, to my breath, they're not dissimilar.
Mhm.
So but at the same time, there are very different people in those spaces, and those spaces are economically structured very differently. And so one might think that that kind of spiritual transcendence is very expensive. And on one hand, sure, it is expensive because there's energy you have to put in to transform yourself. But that could be in the form of however many $1,000 for a workshop, and that could also be an energetic input into collective, into group, into investing in your breaking community or your house community. So I want to create a space to chew on some of what is necessary to expand our sense of self within the context of a club and see what's possible there. It won't be exactly like what happens when you're going to a rave at 3 in the morning in some clandestine warehouse. But it's somewhere in between where I want to be able to share out some tidbits of what we've done, what we've been trying to understand through our practices together in the ensemble, and to find new ways to be together is what I'm curious about.
You have a fascinating vocabulary and a fascinating mind, and I know that you're a fantastic performer. Could you talk to me about your community, your collaborators? List them if you need to. I'm not, I don't know the people as well. Maybe you want to tell me about them and how do they help you achieve some of these goals that you're setting out for us now?
Sure. Um, One of the things I wanted to do with this residency was to bring together people that I've been collaborating with for a long time, that I've already traveled with, already made work with. We already have that kind of uh, relationship, and then bring them into a collective space, which we call non-fatal error is the name of our crew, and trying to find also a way to think of a crew model that has some hierarchy, but it's much more lateral in how we can create multimedia performance. Um, and so for the project and for the structure of the collective in this formation, was really curious about how we can extend each of the senses and then link them back together. That is part of what neurobiology tells us is a measure of wellness, integration in our sensory system. And we want to differentiate them and link them. So one of the questions is what happens when we do that in multimedia performance? If we're
Mm.
looking for something that emerges because of all of these different types of media and the interaction of the senses, then how do we also extend and differentiate them? So that was part of the framework for how I wanted to bring this collective together, that there are people who are related to the senses or to the different disciplines, and they have some, very expanded practice in that regard. So there's a music composer who's going to be playing live electronic music on two MPC lives, Triggered, and he also has a bodybuilding practice. So he'll be doing some performance of bodybuilding choreography, and also wrote the music and will be playing a lot of it live.
Mm.
And his background is in all kinds of electronic music, in dance music forms, also experimental electronic music, and he plays piano and is really interested in classical Western music. So he has a very broad ear, um, and
And his name is
triggered.
Triggered. Ah, I see.
Triggered.
I thought you said he was triggered. So yeah,
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 both,
yeah.
yeah. Um, and then also on the music front, Stefa Marin Alarcon is an vocal artist, director, actor, um, and in this project, they're contributing in all of those ways and helping. What else to say there? Yeah, we're collaborating on the music, so they'll be singing live. So we have Xavier really extending our sense of hearing. Stefa has this incredible voice and practice with their voice. They're extending how we hear voice. And for light and that aspect of the visual, Fabian Gomez is involved and we'll be doing some live video mixing as well as he'll be doing lights from on stage because everything in this performance happens on stage, including the party people who will be there with us.
You
Sekou
inviting the
Luke.
audience to be part of this party, or that you said you bring the party people who will be there with you. So they are performers in the, are we, the audience, invited to also be in the party?
Yeah, the invitation is that the party is a space where people take care of each other. So party people who are really in it, who you see at the club every time you go, and that you know them, and there's a care that happens. So if someone's not doing okay, someone you don't know them and you're going to go ask them if they're okay. Someone collapses on the dance floor. People who don't know them take care of them. They find the medic, they get that person care, right? There is a care that happens in underground club spaces, or however you want to call club spaces that are rooted in community and where people have care for each other. So, what is a world where we all care for each other in that way? And how do we create that kind of relationship? So, the invitation for the folks that come is not to sit in a seat and watch a thing transpire, it's to come and be within this world with us. Um, and so there will be some guiding that they do that, okay, this is how we move through this space. We have an awareness of our body. We have an awareness of shifting our eye. We have an awareness of each other in space, right? So we have some orientation to how we move in the space. And then, yeah, the structure of the performance, everyone is on stage with us. You won't be able to see the seats. There's video projection on two sides, some raised stages, and the action will happen in and among and on these go-go blocks and stages. Because what I really want to get at, or what I'm really curious about exploring, is when I'm at the club, at various clubs, and the dancing I see on the dance floor, the complexity, the beauty, the variety,
Mm-hmm.
the color, that's interesting to me. And I want to see how we can create that kind of excitement that's elevated. It's not just going to be, a DJ and folks dancing. It's going to be activated with live song, live dance, video, and these kind of interactive elements, but it'll oscillate between performance and party and performance, so that the lines between performance and public all start to be a little bit porous. And that's really an invitation um, to for everyone to express themselves maybe more wholly than they might otherwise.
I'm wondering if when you go to most performances, even performances like that happen here, or Chocolate Factory, or whatever, you must be very impatient with the binary of it. People watching, people performing. How are you feeling about our field? And can I say it's our field, or are you in another world? How are you feeling about that? Are you feeling it's stuck? Um, are you still participating?
I mean, of course, there's a value in people sitting in a theater and watching performance. Like, people get value out of that all the time, and that's
Mhm.
great. For me personally, it's hard to sit for long periods of time. That's how I ended up in dance and performance. So, sometimes it's hard for me to separate my own, desire to not sit still and like make some kind of aesthetic, I don't want to say anything about where people are with that. And I think it is important to really consider what we're doing, and that's not a new question. As I think about, postmodernism or something like contact improvisation, they're asking some similar questions. It's like, okay, well, why does the public have to end here and the dancer end there? Like, we can all participate in the creation of this moment. So I think it's just an extension of some of these same kinds of provocations. Um,
So you're not,
at the
you don't seem hung up in, well, I don't know. Let me put it this way. When I was starting, uh, maybe 35, 40 years ago, there was this talk about the distinction between entertainment and art. Are those, is that, is there anything you could share with us about your feeling about, because, you look at Beyonce, you look at Taylor Swift, you look at, people are always doing outlandish things with an audience sitting there and shouting and all. How do you feel about entertainment and art?
I mean, seems like that's not something I get to really decide. It seems like it's decided by the market.
Hmm.
Where you show the same thing could be called one thing or the other thing.
Hmm.
So, if anything, I, as a practicing artist, am often invited to ask myself how I want to show what I want to show, where I want to show it. And that, in part, determines whether it's seen as considered entertainment versus art. But it's a similar thing in visual art, is craft art. And it's like the people who are making those distinctions and asking those questions are generally not the people creating. They're generally the people selling or contextualizing or theorizing. Um, and it's, I, I'm really interested in moving between spaces, ideas that are in between ideas, things that are both art and entertainment and craft and um, yeah, and can be seen in those different ways. But I think it's a moment also to acknowledge the problematic history of aesthetics and who gets to decide what is a lofty idea to put in, an empty white room for us to think about. And um, so, yeah, I think that's part of the question that's inside of this piece as well. Is partying count as creative production? Is that only entertainment? And, and it's only
Well, back in the '60s with
silence.
the Alan Caporals of the world, they talked about happenings. Happenings. In other words, people would get together and things would happen. So they had a similar. Well, maybe we could just for a moment. You have an idea. The lobby will be part of this experience. You want to talk about your visual arts practice and uh, what we might want to know about what's going to be happening in the lobby.
Yeah. So we're doing all the things. And to link it back to the earlier multisensory idea, there's also a question about, um, yeah, how many different ways can we tell this story? So it's a transmedia storytelling project where I'm having experiences, the group is having experiences. I brought the collective to the Dominican Republic to do meditation and filming in nature and connecting with an LGBTQ party and organization there. And we're
Well,
taking
may I
those,
ask why the Dominican Republic?
yeah, I'm looking at spiritual cultural foundations of hip hop and its sister traditions of house and vogue and how they are rooted in Caribbean diaspora communities. So I've been doing some traveling to different islands in the Caribbean to understand, for example, connections between mass and carnival, but also the contemporary music scenes there. So I um, have been doing a few trips to Trinidad and performed there, and also got to do some research and collaborate with fashion designer and do a residency with Makita Thomas's Dance and Performance Institute. And some of that is it's showing up in the lobby. Um, and as I was looking for a space to bring the collective to, the question was whether I was going to continue in Trinidad because we already had a few experiences there, or whether it was going to be somewhere else. And part of how I make decisions is very intuitive and also connected to the people that I'm around. So part of the Trinidad journey is the composer triggered his family. Part of his family is from Trinidad and Tobago. So when we were performing there, we're also connecting with his family and having that cultural connection. So Jason Rodriguez who is in this project, dancing and choreographing, is Dominican. And that came up just organically in some of our conversations, his desire to be there and to connect with communities there. And I'd been there before. So that was enough of a spark for me to go and say, okay, well, what would it mean for this group there and to find community there? So in the last year, I took several trips there to get to know as much as I could about the history and the island, and also find an LGBTQ organization to collaborate with. Um, so that was a different experience than being invited to a festival in a dance space and finding my way through and into community that way. This was really like showing up and having to meet people and see what's going on and get a sense of things. And we were able to collaborate and do an event there in January. So part of the very long answer to your question is broadly looking at formations of protest and gender identity and LGBTQ activism in the Caribbean in these various post-colonial um, environments, and understanding how those connect to street styles of breaking, vogue, house, and also the people that are actually in the room. So it was a combination of those things.
Yes, I
And
see.
Lobby, this has been a 2 year kind of research project where I did a lot of solo travel myself to Ghana and Trinidad and Hawaii doing filming, and then later to the Dominican Republic with the ensemble. Um, and what we're doing in the lobby is just giving an opportunity to unpack some of those experiences and some of that learning in a non-linear storytelling format. So there will be wallpaper along on the whole wall of images, montaged and collaged together from both my solo travels and our group travels. And then there will also be two screens that show video, one that I shot in Trinidad and Ghana and Hawaii solo with collaborators, and then the other, the group trip that happened with the ensemble. And then there will be three custom neon signs that include some of the text, because I haven't mentioned the text collaborator, Renee Alberts, has been co-writing some text with me that out of our discussions around all these very complex topics, she's helping me humanize and distill some of that language. Um, and so the neon signs, one of them is the name of the fashion line that's also being launched as a part of this, Ecstatic Aesthetics.
Yeah, that
And
was
the
my next question. It's a wonderful name. What about how does fashion, you're a designer. Are you a designer?
Yeah, do a little bit of
Yeah.
everything.
Uh-huh. Mhm. Is that what you're wearing right now, that beautiful shirt? Is that an example of what you do?
Yeah, I've decided to see what it would be like to design my whole closet. So pretty much all day, every day at this point, it's ecstatic aesthetics. Um, and that came partly out of the travel, partly out of these multisensory questions. Um, how how do we impact our own cognition? We have to do something kind of extreme, but also regular, right? It's we are creatures of habit. So what I found in developing the language with Renee is there were certain pieces of language that were particularly useful that I'm wanting to share out. So the other two signs, one says positive deviance, and the other is reality threshold.
Provocative. You want to unpack them a little bit for us?
Those are like vocab terms from some of the nerdier reading that I've gotten into. And positive deviance is a sociology term that has to do with when there's a group think situation going on. Everyone's kind of going about doing the same thing, but the thing that everyone's doing is not super healthy or useful or functional. And there are
Mm,
people in that society that say, actually, I'm going to do this other thing. So they deviate and it's useful. Um, and reality threshold is another cognitive term where we have non-conscious processes that are constantly deciding whether what we're experiencing is real or imagined. And that line is not as clearly defined as we'd like to think it is, because unlike other animals, humans have the distinct, or at least more fully developed capacity to have an experience of something that's completely imagined. And it still affects our physiology, and our body can remember it as if it's something that did happen. So there's an invitation to look for opportunities for positive deviance in your own life, because we all need it and we need everyone to be looking for those opportunities, and to question what is real and what is imagined as we think about what's possible as we move forward.
mm,
So
mm,
for ecstatic aesthetics, the questions that came up is, as I was traveling in all those different spaces, being perceived by people in all of those different contexts and all of those different cultural contexts, I started to realize so many of the things that I had been holding, um, in terms of, whether I'm acceptable, desirable, whether it's to do with gender identity or presentation, um, were were cultural products that were a result of so much more history than it's anything that I personally need to hold on to. And I found that very liberating, that every time, while it was troubling sometimes to um, for example, be in one of these castles that has a slave dungeon in Ghana, to be in that space and to feel the dark aura of those rooms, like I now have a visceral understanding of how capitalism will just use you and use you and use you, and
mm,
like seeing like the limit of how far humans will use humans for capital, so that it contextualized just all the other ways I experienced that particular flavor of capitalism. And in the same way with homophobia, it's like, okay, there are countries in the Caribbean who are dealing with their colonial laws that are there from when British, colonial rule was still there, but they're still
mm.
dealing with after effects. And so if I'm going to hear something or someone's going to say something to me, like, is it really between us? Not really. It's this much larger thing that we're all in relationship to.
Well, this is
And
this is probably, we're almost over, but this is an interesting thing to ask a person like you, a radical person like you, because we're now in an era where our what we call been taught was our democracy is really being taken apart every day. And there are people who are saying and doing outlandish things that are a direct assault on this idea that we had about us, the community and democracy. How do you say that if someone says something to you, you don't have to, it's not about you and them. What advice do you give progressive, radical person right now who has to deal with this misinformation, aggression, violence? Guns are everywhere. What is your advice for us?
well, ecstatic aesthetics is high visibility camouflage. And I thought it was important to replace my whole closet and move through the world every day, all day, in this truth, in this sense of reality that I have, maybe because of what you describe as the need to have something coherent to hold on to.
Mhm.
Um, so I think we have to double down on what we believe to be coherent, to be true, and and to remember that a coherent narrative breaks, and we can't get more and more rigid as reality becomes more and more diffuse. We need to be more and more clear, but remain dynamic in
Mm,
the kinds of thought systems that we create and move through. We need to um, get past binary thinking and move towards something more dynamic. So
mhm,
that's something I'm thinking about. How can I be both very sure and moving ahead and creating a future that I want to live in with other people, but not fall into a kind of trap of polarization, um, and still do what needs to be done and say what needs to be said and undo what needs to be done.
well, amen, my dear friend. I won't hound you more. I know you're a really very special artist, and we're really happy to have this work, which almost defies definition, this work, Unfinished Animal, here at New York Live Arts. So uh, thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you so much.